Historians on Reddit, what's a devastating event that no one talks about? Something that is well known, but not that much, is the Goiânia accident in Brazil, where cesium-137 was handled by many people, including children. It is regarded as the worst radioactive incident to happen in Brazil. It was a radioactive contamination accident that happened on September 13, 1987, after a radiotherapy machine from an abandoned hospital was illegally stripped for parts, and said parts were stolen. On September 16, one of the thieves opened a cesium capsule, and then on September 18 sold it to a scrapyard. At that same night, the owner of the scrapyard saw a blue glow in the machine's parts, which was the cesium capsule that had been opened. Thinking it might be valuable, he brought it to his home. Over the next 3 days he invited friends and family to see the strange glowing substance. On September 21, one of his friends succeeded in freeing several rice-sized grains of the glowing material from the opened capsule. He then started sharing some of them with friends and family. On September 25, the capsule was again sold to another scrapyard, although 1 day before the sale more dust was removed from the capsule by the scrapyard owner's brother. The brother then took the dust home and spread it on the floor, where later his daughter would play with the dust. She also ate while on the floor, and dust fell on her food. One of the family members of the owner of the first scrapyard noticed that many people around her fell ill, and on September 28 she reclaimed the capsule from the second scrapyard and brought it to a hospital. In the morning of September 29 it was confirmed that the material was radioactive, and the doctors persuaded authorities to take immediate action on the matter. The city, state, and national governments were all aware of the incident by the end of the day. News of the radiation incident was broadcast on local, national, and international media. Within days, nearly 130,000 people went to local hospitals concerned that they might have been exposed. Of those, only 250 were indeed contaminated, some with radioactive residue still on their skin. 4 of those people died, including a 6-year-old girl, the one that ate the dust. Edit. For those who are making fun of the child's death, or calling these people ignorant/stupid. 1. The child wasn't fed the dust. Particles contaminated her food. 2. The dust looked like glitter. That's the reason why people thought it was harmless, and handed it to friends and family. Highly recommend the 1990 movie Cesium-137, O Pesadelo de Goiânia, Cesium-137, The Nightmare of Goiânia, by Roberto Paes. 3. Those people were in their majority poor, and probably didn't have access to almost, if any, education. In the 70s, 80s, having completed high school was uncommon for people from poor origins, and probably didn't even know radiation poisoning was a thing. 4. Have some little respect for the child. She died alone in the hospital, because staff were so afraid of going into her room and getting contaminated. She also had to be buried in a closed lead casket, and there were protesters asking for her not to be buried in a public graveyard. The Carrington Event, https://n.wikipedia.org/wiki/Carrington Event = =S1. In 1859, solar flares hit the Earth, causing an aurora borealis effect to be seen all over the world. It lasted for several days, during which time it was reportedly bright enough to read by at midnight. Telegraph operators reported receiving shocks and burns from the devices, and in some cases removed the batteries powering the telegraphs, as signals were being disrupted by the geomagnetic storm. After removing the batteries, the telegraphs still operated, in some cases better than they had when powered. It wasn't particularly devastating at the time, but it's estimated that, if a similar storm were to hit us today, it would cripple the entire planet for potentially decades. The estimated repair cost in the US alone is measured in the trillions. In 2012, A similar storm missed the Earth by 9 days. The Anderson Massacre of 2005 in Uzbekistan. It is largest mass shooting in Asia since Tiananmen Square, with over 1,000 killed and even more wounded. The Uzbek government forcefully silenced reform protests by firing into the crowd, and then kicked out 90% of Westerners in the country when the US Gov and UN tried to investigate. Terrible loss of life that rarely gets remembered, because the Uzbek government tried so hard to cover it up. This is fairly recent, started in 1998, and ended in 2003, but the Second Congo War. It's the deadliest conflict since WW2 with about 5.4 million deaths, a vast majority of them due to malnutrition and disease. Edit. Glad to see this post getting so much attention. As some of you mentioned, a lot of African history is overlooked, so here are a few more 20th century African conflicts to look into, if you are interested. Boer Wars, Mau Mau Uprising, Rhodesian Bush War, First and Second Liberian Civil War, Sierra Leone Civil War, Angolan Civil War, First and Second Sudanese Civil War, Somali Civil War, Eritrean-Ethiopian War, Congo Crisis, Nigerian Civil War. I'm not really a proper historian, but I feel the need to mention the Bronze Age collapse. It's not as though nobody talks about it at all, but considering how catastrophic it was, it doesn't get nearly enough attention. At this time civilizations were still pretty scarce, but the Eastern Mediterranean was full of them. We can't pinpoint an exact reason, but at some point it all fell apart. The Mycenaeans? Gone. The Hittites? Gone. The Minoans? Gone. The Egyptians? Barely clinging on, and having serious problems. There are many things that happened around that time in that general area that could be the culprit. Volcanoes, earthquakes, drought, famine, war and invasions from foreigners that came by boat, that historians have named the Sea People, because we have basically no idea where they came from. In reality, it was probably a combination of some, or even all of them. Again, I'm not a proper historian by any means, but this is what I heard. Actual historians, feel free to correct any mistakes, or mention something I missed. Baghdad used to be one of the biggest and most vibrant cities in the world in the 1200s until the Mongols came. Baghdad did not recover its year 1200 population until the 1980s Cambodian genocide. They killed so many kids that the life expectancy was 18, taping Heavenly Kingdom of Hongzhiuquan. Put simply, it was an usurp kingdom in 1850s China that directly and indirectly led to the deaths of millions, maybe 10 million plus, of people through massacre and famine. Hongzhiuquan believed he was the younger brother of Jesus Christ, and persuaded enough people to follow along and start a civil war. Check out God's Chinese Son by Jonathan Spence. I'm always amazed that people know so little about Pol Pot and Cambodia. His regime killed 25% of its population. Let that sink in, 1 in 4. If you were educated, you were first killed. The year 536 marked the beginning of a very bad time period. https://www.sciencemag.org/news/2018/11/y536 One worst year be alive. Basically several natural disasters and social upheaval abso-fucking-lutely devastated multiple societies. It's thought that a volcanic eruption blocked out enough sun to cause crop failures across Europe and as far as China. While this was happening, terrible plagues were also afflicting the Middle East. Economies everywhere fell to ruin and stagnation in the years that followed, because several other eruptions later made things worse. During WW2, the Japanese had invaded the Alaskan island of Attu. On the island was the village of Attu, where the Aleutian tribe had lived for centuries. The only non-natives were the wife school teacher and priest husband, who were elderly and beloved by the townspeople. They were both shot by the Japanese. After that, the Japanese loaded the native population onto ships back to Japan, where they worked in POW camps, where many died from disease and execution. The Japanese saw them as lower than solid POW, and almost subhuman, because they didn't fight back, and thus treated them horribly. When the war ended, only a handful of the native population survived, and they went back home only to find their village burned down. They left the island, and it now remains uninhabited basically, driving the Atu tribe to extinction. Years later, the Japanese left a peace monument on the island in honor of the American and Japanese soldiers that died there, but have yet to apologize to the descendants of the Atu tribe they destroyed. Edit. Grammar.